Frances told me a few years later that she was sort of thrilled at the way that Diana sort of freed herself, as she saw it, from the shackles of royalty and from being a member of the royal family and striking out on her own.
Have you ever wondered what secrets can stay hidden for centuries, even inside one of the most famous families in the world? Because what DNA revealed about Princess Diana's mother's ancestry isn't just surprising, it's deeply unsettling. For generations, the Spencer family was believed to represent the very core of British aristocracy, pure, documented, and unquestioned. Historians, biographers, even the public, no one had any reason to doubt it. Until modern science stepped in. When geneticists began analyzing DNA from Diana's maternal relatives, they expected confirmation of everything history had already written. Instead, they uncovered a genetic signature so rare, it barely exists on the planet. And here's where things take a strange turn. That marker doesn't trace back to Europe at all. It leads thousands of miles away to South Asia. Even more shocking, the lineage appears to connect to a single woman from over 200 years ago, someone whose story seems to have been quietly erased from official records. So how did this hidden ancestry make its way into one of Britain's most iconic bloodlines? And why does it seem like no one wanted it to be discovered? Because the deeper you go into this story, the less it feels like a coincidence, and the more it starts to look like something that was deliberately buried. And the truth? It was hiding in their DNA the entire time. The DNA discovery started with 2 small vials of saliva arriving at a genetics lab in Edinburgh, Scotland. The year was 2013. The samples came from 2 women directly descended from Princess Diana's maternal line, both third cousins of Diana's mother, Frances Shan Kidd. These weren't random volunteers pulled off the street. They were specifically chosen because they shared something extraordinary. An unbroken mother-to-daughter connection stretching back over 200 years. Dr. Jim Wilson and his team at the University of Edinburgh, working alongside the genetic ancestry company Britain's DNA, began their analysis and focused on one very specific type of genetic material, mitochondrial DNA. Now, most people have never heard of mitochondrial DNA. Here's why it matters. Unlike the rest of your DNA, which gets shuffled and recombined every single time 2 parents create a child, mitochondrial DNA doesn't mix at all. It doesn't change. It doesn't blend with the father's genetics. It passes completely intact from mother to daughter, generation after generation, like a sealed letter that nobody can open or edit along the way. Think about that for a second. That means if your mother's 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 mother carried a specific genetic marker 1,000 years ago, you could still carry the exact same one today. It's a time capsule, a silent witness, an unbroken chain reaching all the way back through the centuries, completely untouched by any man who ever entered the family. The team used a specialized chip to scan hundreds of markers along the mitochondrial genome. It was supposed to be a routine ancestry test, another aristocratic bloodline confirmed, another footnote in English history. But when the results came back, Dr. Wilson didn't see what he expected. He saw something that made him stop and run the analysis again, and then run it a 3rd time. He later described that moment to the press. The sheer disbelief of staring at a genetic marker that had no business appearing in a British royal family, a marker that, in his entire career studying population genetics, he had only ever associated with one region on Earth. The samples belonged to haplogroup R30b. Out of more than 65,000 people in their worldwide genetic database, only 14 carried this exact marker. 13 of them lived in India, 1 lived in Nepal, and nobody in Europe had ever shown up with it. Nobody in Africa. Nobody in the Americas. And now this same ancient South Asian signature had just appeared in the bloodline of the most photographed woman in British history. Here's the catch. The R30b haplogroup, along with its closely related branches R30 and R30a, is entirely South Asian in origin. There's no ambiguity, there's no alternative explanation. Dr. Wilson later told the press the evidence was unassailable. This wasn't a statistical fluke or some contaminated sample. It was a clear, undeniable scientific trail confirmed independently by matching DNA from 2 separate living relatives who didn't even know each other. The presence of R30b meant one thing. Somewhere around 7 generations before Princess Diana, a woman with South Asian ancestry had entered her direct maternal line. Not a distant cousin, not a minor branch, the direct line, mother to daughter to daughter to daughter, all the way to Diana herself. And that meant the official Spencer family history, the one printed in every genealogy book, every royal biography, every wedding program, was missing an entire chapter. The search turned from the laboratory to the archives. If the DNA was right, then someone real had been deliberately written out of the story, someone whose blood still flowed through the veins of princes. The question became, who was she? And why had she been hidden for 200 years? If you're the kind of person who believes science should expose what powerful families try to bury, hit subscribe right now, because this story is just getting started. Eliza Kiwark, the woman they wiped away. Her name was Eliza Kiwark, and for more than 2 centuries, almost no one knew she was there. Her name never showed up in the official Spencer family trees. It wasn't included in any royal life story. If you looked through the records open to the public before 2013, you would see no sign of her. She was born around 1790 in Surat, a lively port city on India's western shore in what is today the state of Gujarat. In those times, Surat stood as one of India's major trading crossroads, a place where merchant ships from many nations filled the harbor, where traders spoke in a mix of languages, where goods and people and cultures met in the tight streets every single day. It was the kind of place where a woman of mixed roots could live without drawing much notice. Eliza's father had the Armenian name Kievor, and she wrote her own letters in Armenian script. That detail would later turn into the family's most helpful cover. But her mother's line, the one that held the rare R30b mitochondrial marker, was South Asian. In colonial India, mixed roots were common in port cities like Surat. Armenian traders had lived there for generations, marrying into local families. But in the strict social order of the British Empire, that kind of background carried serious dangers. Now here's where the story shifts. As a young woman, Eliza became the companion of Theodore Forbes, a Scottish trader who came to Surat around 1809 to work for the East India Company. Forbes was the younger son of a landowning family from Boley in Aberdeen, driven, clever, and determined to build a career in the empire's richest outpost. He hired Eliza as his housekeeper, but the truth of their bond went far deeper than any job title. Together, Eliza and Theodore had 2 children, a daughter named Catherine, born in 1812, and a son named Alexander, born 2 years later. For a while, the family stayed together, first in Surat and then in Mocha, Yemen, where Theodore was named British political resident. His role was to purchase coffee for the East India Company and watch shipping at the entrance to the Red Sea. Letters from this time show that Eliza was more than a household servant. Theodore depended on her multilingual skills. She was valuable to his diplomatic work. By every private measure, they were a family. But here's the truth. As Theodore's career grew and he accepted a respected partnership back in Bombay, the social realities of British India closed in on them like a trap. In the drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs of colonial Bombay, a wife with Indian roots wasn't just disliked, she was a career-ending burden. The time when mixed marriages in India were accepted, even supported, was quickly fading. A new era of racial division was taking hold. Theodore made this heartbreaking choice. He left Eliza and the children behind in Surat. He moved to Bombay alone, and while he stayed with friends and joined society gatherings, Eliza and her children lived apart, cut off from the life he was building without them. And then something happened that still shadows this story 2 centuries later. Years after Theodore's death, a bundle of letters written in a non-European script was found at the Forbes family estate at Boley in Scotland. They had been lying there for decades, untouched, unread, collecting dust in a drawer. When scholars finally studied them, they understood what they had found. The letters were from Eliza, written in broken English, dictated to a Parsi scribe because her written English wasn't strong enough, and signed in her own hand in Armenian script. Letter after letter across years all carried the same desperate request to be allowed to see her daughter one last time before Catherine was sent away to Europe forever. In one letter she wrote, "My good sir, I pray you let me know by your leave. I will bring my child to give in your hand by myself." Read that again slowly. A mother asking permission. Permission to hand her own daughter over, knowing that once she did, she would never see that child again, knowing that an empire stood between them. And still, she offered to make the journey herself just to hold Catherine one last time, and nobody answered her. When Theodore died at sea in 1820, everything fell apart. His will described Eliza only as his housekeeper. He called Catherine his so-called natural daughter. The wording was careful, every line chosen to cut off any legal or social link between Eliza and the family she had built. Catherine, just 8 years old, was placed on a ship bound for Scotland, accompanied only by a servant named Fazagul. She sailed to a cold land she had never seen to live with relatives she had never met. She never saw her mother again. Young Alexander, her brother, reached Scotland too, but he was so homesick and unhappy that he was eventually sent back to Surat to be with Eliza. Catherine stayed. She grew up among the Forbes family. She adjusted, and in time she married well. But wait, it gets worse, because through Catherine, this hidden bloodline didn't just survive, it flourished. Catherine gave birth to a daughter. That daughter had a daughter. And so it continued, generation after generation, until the line produced Ruth, then Frances, then a girl born on the 1st of July, 1961, at Park House on the Sandringham estate. Her name was Diana Frances Spencer. 7 generations from a port city in India to the most famous wedding in television history, and no one in the family ever revealed the truth about where that bloodline truly began. But the silence wasn't accidental. It was planned, and the cover-up that followed was one of the most complete acts of genealogical erasure in British aristocratic history. The 2-century cover-up. Victorian Britain didn't just care about lineage, it admired it deeply. For families like the Spencers, rising through the highest levels of English society, any hint of non-European ancestry wasn't just awkward, it was deeply threatening. Had it been widely known that Catherine Forbes and her descendants carried Indian roots, they might never have made the marriages that secured their place in the aristocracy. Every generation that followed would have been marked by what the Victorians called colored blood. So the family did what powerful families have always done. They reshaped history. Eliza's name, Kievor, was close enough to the Armenian name Kivor. She signed letters in Armenian script. Her father may truly have had Armenian roots, and that single detail became the entire accepted story. Armenian meant Christian. Armenian meant respectable. Armenian meant safely different, a curiosity of the empire, nothing more. Indian heritage, on the other hand, would have been treated as a lasting mark that no amount of wealth or marriage could erase. And get this, the cover-up didn't just last a generation. It lasted over 200 years. Genealogies published in the 19th century told only the Armenian version. Family trees, marriage records, church documents, and private letters, all of it carefully cleared of any mention of India or mixed roots. By the 20th century, the story was so firmly set that no one alive even questioned it. When Diana married Prince Charles at St. Paul's Cathedral in 1981 in front of 750 million television viewers, the official biography still described Eliza Kiwark as Armenian. Nobody in the Spencer family questioned it. Nobody in the royal household questioned it. The secret held. It held through 2 world wars. It held through the fall of the British Empire. It held through the most watched wedding in human history, until 2013 when 2 vials of saliva tore it open. Now here's where it gets personal. After the DNA results were released, reporters tracked down Diana's maternal aunt, a woman named Mary Roach. She was one of the few living people who had grown up hearing the old family stories, the ones passed down at dinner tables and in private letters for generations. When they told her what the DNA had revealed, she paused, and then she said something that captures the irony of 2 centuries of deception in a single sentence. "I always assumed that I was part Armenian, so I am delighted that I also have an Indian background." Think about that for a moment. A woman in Princess Diana's own family had lived her entire life believing a story that was genetically untrue. She didn't know. Her mother didn't know. Her grandmother didn't know. The story had been so complete, so carefully preserved across so many generations that even the people carrying the DNA had no idea what it truly was. The real story had been written in their cells the entire time. It just took science to finally uncover it. More royal than the royals. But the hidden Indian ancestry was only one part of a family story that gets stranger the deeper you look. Because the Spencers weren't just any aristocratic family, they were in some ways more royal than the royals themselves. Here's what most people don't realize. Royal blood in Diana's family didn't come through official marriages or grand alliances. It came from the wrong side of the sheets, through mistresses. Barbara Villiers, Louise de Keroualle, and Nell Gwyn each held the attention of King Charles II, a monarch known for fathering more than a dozen children with women who would never become queen. The Spencer family traces its lineage through not one, not two, but three of these royal mistresses. Their children were born outside the rules of succession, but their bloodline quietly made its way into the English aristocracy over centuries. Diana descended from Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Grafton, and Charles Lennox, Duke of Richmond, both illegitimate sons of Charles II. 11 generations back, she was also a direct descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots, executed in 1587 by her cousin Elizabeth I. Meanwhile, the Spencer estate at Althorpe had stood since 1508, surviving wars, dynasties, and the rise and fall of monarchs. The royal family's own name, by contrast, was Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, clearly German, until King George V quietly changed it to Windsor during the First World War to avoid anti-German backlash. And here's the sharp irony. When Diana's engagement to Prince Charles was announced in 1981, the editors of Burke's Peerage, the definitive record of British aristocracy, made a public statement that surprised even the royal household. They declared that Lady Diana Spencer had more English royal blood running through her veins than her future husband. The Spencers, they said, were filled with royal connections. By the oldest measure, Diana wasn't marrying up. Charles was. A woman whose family had spent 2 centuries hiding her Indian ancestor turned out to be more royal than the prince she was marrying. The Spencers had protected their secret so fiercely for so long that by the time Diana walked down the aisle, the irony was invisible to everyone in that cathedral. The family that had erased a woman from India to protect their bloodline had produced the most significant bride in modern royal history. And still, nobody revealed the truth, not until the DNA spoke for itself. The line ends. This is where the story closes, and it closes sharply. Prince William carries the same rare R30b mitochondrial marker that began in Gujarat over 200 years ago. It passed through Eliza Kiwark, crossed oceans, survived colonial prejudice, outlasted 2 centuries of deliberate erasure, and reached the DNA of the man who will one day sit on the British throne. The autosomal markers across the genomes of Diana's 2 maternal cousins confirmed they carried between 0.3 and 0.8% South Asian ancestry, meaning William himself almost certainly carries a small but real portion of Indian DNA inherited from Eliza. He will be the first British monarch with proven Indian ancestry. The Commonwealth, home to over 1 billion people of South Asian descent, will one day be led by a king with a direct genetic link to their region. That's not symbolism. That's not a diplomatic gesture. That's biology written into the cells of a man who will wear the crown. But here's the final twist, and this one doesn't have a happy ending. Mitochondrial DNA flows only from mother to child. Men carry it, but they cannot pass it on. William inherited the R30b marker from Diana, but his children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, will not inherit it from him. The marker ends with William and his brother Harry. The ancient genetic thread that traveled from a port city in western India through 7 generations of English women, across continents and centuries of silence, all the way to the steps of Buckingham Palace. The thread ends here. Eliza Kiwark was erased from the family records. Her letters gathered dust in a Scottish archive for nearly 200 years. Her name was replaced with a convenient story. Her heritage was removed from every document the family could reach. And now the last biological trace of her existence is fading from the royal bloodline forever. She fought to see her daughter one last time. They refused her. They buried her name. They reshaped her story. They turned her into someone she wasn't. And now, 200 years later, even her DNA, the last whisper of proof that she ever existed in this bloodline, will disappear. Eliza Kiwark lost everything. And the final thing she had left to give, her genetic signature, the world is about to lose too. The Spencers spent 200 years hiding this woman. What else do you think the world's most powerful families are still keeping buried?